Welcome to the 30/30 Health Podcast. The following discussion is for education and entertainment. It is not intended to diagnose or treat disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first discussing it with your doctor. Here is your host, Guillermo Ruiz.
Hello everyone, today's guest on the show is Ari Whitten. Ari is the #1 best-selling author of the cutting-edge book, Forever Fat Loss. He is a fat loss and nutrition expert who has been running a nutrition counseling and personal training business for over a decade. Ari has a Bachelor's of Science from the San Diego State University in Kinesiology with a specialization in fitness, nutrition, and health. He holds 2 advanced certifications from the National Academy of Sports Medicine and recently completed coursework for his PhD in clinical psychology, an education which rounds out all aspects of nutrition, fitness, and psychology for his approach to optimal health. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with your friends and visit my website 3030strong.com where you can download my free ebook, The Top Supplements for Your Natural Medicine Cabinet. Here's the show. Hello everyone, so I'm here with Ari Whitten, and I met Ari in a very cool way. We went camping at Havasu Pi, and we just spent like a couple of days together and just talking, geeking out on science and talking about plants and antioxidants, and hopefully we can bring all of this around at some point. But how are you doing, Ari? How keto are you today?
I'm great. But we should explain that. That was a reference to a conference I was at recently where they were serving bulletproof coffee. And I went over to the coffee stand and I just wanted to get a cup of coffee with a little MCT oil, or what they call their, what
octane,
do they call it?
Something octane.
Yeah, brain octane oil. And I didn't want the butter in it. So I kind of had to, rather than get it from the dispenser, I had to speak directly to the guy and just say, here's a plain cup of coffee. Can you add some MCT oil to it? And the guy looked at me and he's like, how keto are you, bro? And I'm like, I probably not as keto as you. But no, actually, I think I said, I'm so freaking keto, bro.
And then the joke that I made was, which I think was pretty clever, I can breathe on your nails and destroy your nail polish because of that acetone, man.
Or I'm so freaking keto that the amount of brain octane oil you're about to put in this coffee is going to make me crap my pants.
Yeah, exactly. But, it's fun. It's all fun and games. But I've had, in my experience, in my very short clinical experience, I had a patient come in and she had some hypothyroid problems, and she was in a spring chicken. She was a little bit older. She was doing fasted workouts with bulletproof green tea because she didn't like coffee. So she was doing fasted workouts, hypothyroid fasted workouts with MCT oil. And she had come to the clinic and she was like, I'm not feeling 100% anymore. What do you think is wrong? I want to have this conversation with you because I know you've studied the paleo diet pretty intensively, and you came to different conclusions that are not what's surfacing right now. And sometimes we get into trouble when the marketing is way better than the science. So then you end up convincing people that maybe shouldn't be doing a ketogenic diet into doing a ketogenic diet because that's cool, bro. So what's your approach to staying fit macroscopically? Okay, so I think we've primed this as you're not keto. And you actually wrote a book that is called
The Low Carb Myth.
The Low Carb Myth. Okay, so macronutrient, what do you think would be the perfect diet for populations, or what is your perspective on this paleo thing?
Well, so yeah, that's a good question. So you said a second ago, I'm not keto. I should also point out here that pretty much all hunter-gatherers are also not keto. And, there's been this kind of weird, unnatural conflation of paleo and hunter-gatherers and our ancestors with low carb and with keto. If you actually look at the evidence on the subject and the studies, which we have, which have analyzed the diet compositions of various hunter-gatherer tribes around the world, they're not low carb in a large portion of cases. They're certainly not keto. And even the Inuit people who eat, who basically eat a super fat rich diet and have almost no access to plant foods at all because plant foods don't grow on ice, even they are not keto because they actually eat, even with all their blubber rich, whale and seal meat and all that, they actually consume enough glycogen from the fresh meat as well as enough protein from those animals to keep them out of ketosis. So even when you're looking at a hunter-gatherer population that exists in a place where plants don't even grow, they're not keto. So that's why I say, there's been a kind of weird conflation of keto and hunter-gatherers. And, it's become this whole keto, low carb thing, high fat thing has become conflated with hunter-gatherers and paleo. And it just is not accurate. They're not as connected as people imagine. The diets that a lot of people are recommending, the keto diets that have become popular, where you sometimes have people recommending a diet that's like 70 or 80% fat, there isn't a hunter-gatherer population on Earth that eats a diet like that.
And then you get into the problem that, you are chastising people that are eating, your maybe an organic potato and some nice, cut of meat and a piece of fruit, and you're chastising them because hey, dude, you're not eating keto, and your ketogenic diet consists of purified MCT oil, some bar that is high in low carb and high in some protein emulsion or something like that. And then you don't really notice that maybe your diet is not as natural as you think.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what I'm saying is people are adopting a diet in the name of paleo, in the name of our ancestors, that has nothing to do with our ancestors. And I want to take a step back here for a second, because I'd probably just piss some people off. So I want to step back for a second and say to people that I actually am largely on board with paleo. And I am very much coming from that same naturalistic evolutionary perspective. And I do think that we need to operate from that paradigm of
evolution,
of looking what our genes are programmed for, what kind of environment have they evolved for, and try to replicate that as best as possible. I'm just saying, hey, an 80% fat diet doesn't have a lot to do with that.
It happens a lot with science, and I'm gonna give you a little example. When we discovered penicillin, having a strep throat infection or any type of infection was a big problem. And you could die from these infections. So then we discovered penicillin, and now we have this one thing that can cure that infection. Now we're trying to fit every single disease process with this same type of silver bullet. So now, we declare war on cancer, we declare war on heart disease, and we're constantly looking for the quotes penicillin for heart attacks, penicillin for cancer. But it's multifactorial. It's not just like, well, this penicillin has a mechanism of action where it's going to kill the bacteria. There's not one thing that is going to give you a heart attack. So because a lot of people have had great success with ketogenic diets, and we discussed this when we were camping, about using ketogenic diets for things like seizures and things like that. So there are points where we might need a ketogenic diet, but there's not one size fits all. So guess what, guys? There's other people that are doing paleo things, scientifically and evolutionarily sound diets that don't have to be high in fat.
Yeah, I mean, and let's just talk a little bit about the evidence on that. One thing I'd recommend to your listeners is, if you want to read a real paleo book that isn't biased about what the diets of hunter-gatherers actually look like, read Stefan Lindeberg's book. He's actually a researcher that has gone to all sorts of modern day hunter-gatherer tribes all over the world that are still eating their traditional diet and actually analyzed their diet and, took measurements, physical measurements on these people, looked at their rates of heart disease and cancer and diabetes, and took blood glucose measurements. And here's the macronutrient composition of their diet, for this tribe, for that tribe. If you want to talk about what these tribes actually eat, we can talk about, for example, the Tarahumara Indians. They eat a diet that's 75% carbohydrate. We can talk about the Kitavans in the South Pacific. They eat a diet that's 69% carbohydrate. We can talk about the Yu tribe, or in Africa, or the Tukisenta tribe in Papua New Guinea, that eat diets that are like 90% carbohydrates. There are lots and lots of examples of hunter-gatherer tribes that still exist today that are eating diets that are not just not low in carbohydrates, but where the majority of their calories are coming from carbohydrates. There was even a recent study where they looked at the Hadza tribe, and they showed that on a lot of days, a lot of the members of the tribe, especially the males, over 80% of their calories was coming from honey. So, I mean, again, this is why it's just kind of insane that we're over here in America and we have these ideas about, our hunter-gatherers, they eat low carb, high-fat diets. Where exactly was all this fat coming from? Do we imagine that they were harvesting butter? And the other point that's interesting here is a lot of wild game animals, especially as you move closer towards the equator. So we talked about, for example, the Inuit. When you go into those regions that are extraordinarily cold, animals insulate themselves with large amounts of blubber. So it's much easier to get a higher fat diet in a case like that. As you move closer to the equator, wild game animals tend to be extremely lean. They're not covered in blubber at the equator. And that's, by the way, where the majority of hunter-gatherers evolved, is close to the equator, not at the poles. So, there was an interesting study in Australia where they took some Aboriginal Australians who had been urbanized, and they had moved out of their rural existence. They went to the cities, they got fat, they got diabetic. And then these researchers said, what would happen if we took this group of people and put them back in their traditional existence, put them back in the rural, in the bush, and had them live their traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle again? Well, they lost weight dramatically and reversed insulin resistance, as you would expect. But one other thing was interesting when they analyzed their diet composition. Their diets were composed of, I think, 67 or 69% animal foods. So, a large portion of their diet was coming from animal foods. Yet when they did the actual calorie breakdown, only about 13% was from fat. In other words, these are people who 2/3 of everything they're eating is essentially meat or some animal product. And yet they're eating what would be the equivalent of an extreme low-fat diet in our terms. That's because the animals they're eating are extremely lean. They're not fatty animals.
And, I don't think that what you're trying to imply is that eating carbohydrates is the right thing. It's that there are different mixes according to your genetic makeup, according to your status of living, according to your how much do you move. And then secondly, a point that I want to make: who is to say that if you're hunting your own venison, and having venison with some organic potatoes and some vegetables, who's to say that is not paleo?
I would argue that's pretty close to paleo. That's in a lot of the diets of various tribes, I would say that's pretty right on. I would say it's much closer than the 80% butter rich diet.
And that's the point that I'm trying to make, that automatically you say paleo and people think, bacon and coffee. That's what my diet is going to consist of. I think it's a very cool inside joke for people that understand the science and we understand what's going on. But sometimes you can mistake this joke and then think that that's paleo. To me, an evolutionary diet is not macronutrient you cannot put a macronutrient ratio to it, because as you age, as your intensity of exercise changes, if you are sick, it should change. It should change with your health. To me, an evolutionary diet is the most anti-inflammatory diet that you can eat at that point in time.
Well, I think one of the big problems is just the human tendency towards reductionist thinking. And we're so used to these different diets coming out on the market, and oh, this diet's the Atkins diet, and here's a list of good foods and bad foods, and here's the bulletproof diet, and here's a list of good foods and bad foods, and here's the the Ornish diet, or whatever it is. And they all have very rigid rule systems and lists of good foods and bad foods. And when the paleo diet came out, it kind of tried to conform to that and say, when Lauren Cordain wrote his first book and said, here's what the paleo diet is. What?
He encouraged lean meats, and I have a copy of that book, and it's like,
that book had its kind of original take on things, and then people took spin off of it and went more towards fatty foods and more towards even lower carb than what he was recommending. And basically he tried to define and say, here's what the paleo diet is. It's these foods and not that foods. It's, you're not allowed to have dairy, you're not allowed to have grains, you're not allowed to have legumes and things like that. And as I was kind of implying earlier when I was talking about specific diets, there isn't one paleo diet. There's a huge range of different paleo diets, and certainly many of them do include grains, do include plenty of starches, do eat high carb diets, and low fat diets. And so to define it as, oh, it's these macronutrient proportions, it's these foods and not those foods, it's just not accurate. I mean, there's going to be lots of exceptions to every rule that you create. And so when we talk about a paleo diet, I think the fundamentals of that are, if you want to talk about something that's really not controversial, is whole foods, minimally processed, and or not processed, maybe other than cooking or sun drying or something like that. And you know what? I mean, beyond that, pretty much everything you try to create is going to have some exception to the rule.
And I think you hit a very big point there, because we do like rules. And sometimes in this fair play environment that we live in, if you tell a patient, well, you have type 2 diabetes, you probably shouldn't be eating dried fruit. And then they look around and they see, someone from the CrossFit community chomping on dried fruit, and they're like, why can't they? And so we don't like having this different, too many options. We want like very rigid foods, but that doesn't work because we are so different when it comes to our genome. And do you mind talking a little bit about some of the findings on your 23andMe?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, because and I want him to tell the story, because we think keto and just a ripped dude, and then you see Ari, and then you're like, well, it's probably all genetics, but you had some findings on your genetic code.
Yeah, no, well, I've always known, just through my own N=1 experience, that I have to work my tail off to stay lean. But obviously when people look at me, they go, oh, it's genetic. He's genetically muscular. He's genetically lean. And I actually just did a 23andMe analysis, and I was mainly interested in looking at my ancestry, but also getting some of the data points and putting them through some of these online softwares where they can break down your different genes associated with various health outcomes. And one of the things that I found is I have an extraordinarily strong predisposition towards obesity, almost as strong of a predisposition as it's possible to have. And so that was interesting. And basically, if I don't exercise, if I don't watch my diet very carefully, I put on fat very, very easily. And so, yeah, I mean, I everything that I have as far as my physique, I worked very, very hard for.
How were the switchbacks coming back from the campground?
Oh man, that was tough.
So it took us. We went down to the Grand Canyon, and very few people make it down to the Grand Canyon. It took me and my buddy Adam. It took us 4 hours to go from the top of the rim all the way to the campground. It took us 5.5 hours going back.
Yeah.
At one point, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to leave my bag on the side, and I'm just gonna walk the whole way through.
You're gonna leave your bag behind.
Dude, I was like, I'm done.
Yeah, it was challenging for me because we were there with Alan and
he's a beast.
Yeah, and yeah, I guess we should mention Alan Christensen to your viewers. They probably know him, or a lot of people are familiar with him. And I'm like sprinter power guy,
Fast
so
twitch.
like I'm really good at like really really brief explosive bursts, or lifting very heavy objects and being done in less than a minute, and then taking a break. And Alan is like over here like Mr. Triathlon, like marathon runner, like just he's like the Energizer Bunny. He just can go all day. I don't get the impression that he feels fatigue at all
ever.
And so I'm there with like this guy who's Mr. Endurance, and I'm over here like not at all Mr. Endurance. And I definitely felt like pressure to kind of keep up with him and keep going. And every time I wanted to rest, he would just kind of keep going. And I'm like, shit.
Yeah.
We really have to keep going. I would really love to just sit and rest for like 10 minutes right now.
And then, yeah, and the most beautiful thing, okay, is that I'm in school right now, okay, so I don't have a lot of time to exercise. I don't have a lot of leisure time, and I've been able to. I do have a problem with weight too. I fluctuate really rapidly. I love to eat, and if I don't watch what I eat, I can balloon up so fast, and I maintain a weight of around 155 pounds. And I've been doing this by watching my macros, so I do eat, on the lower side of carb, I average around 130 grams of carbohydrates a day, okay? And I'm pretty consistent with that. If I go out to eat, I don't care what I eat, but when I'm, Monday through Friday, I try to watch my macros. And then you have Dr. Christensen, who eats all day long, tons of carbs, and he is just moving so fast through this. And then we have you who watches what you eat too. And all three of us, have different genetic makeup. All three of us made it through this camping trip, and we have pretty different diets. And who is to say that those diets are not quote unquote paleo for us and the exercise and the movement that we do?
Yeah, and I do a lot of high intensity exercise too, and if I don't have carbs, if I don't have lots of carbs in my diet, I'm not going to perform as well, and I'm not going to look as good and feel as good, and that's just fact. And there's plenty of evidence to support it, although there's a few studies here and there that suggest people can maintain performance on a keto diet or something like that. Even high intensity performance, there's been a couple studies that have come out like that in the last year or two. But there are certainly studies that contradict those claims, and there are certainly studies that show that muscle protein synthesis is lower when you're lower carb and things like that. So to clarify my perspective, I absolutely agree with you that there is a place for keto. There's a place for low carb. And for certain contexts, certain individuals, depending on their ancestry and their genetics and their amount of exercise and their lifestyle, lower carb may actually be superior for those people, and other contexts where it's going to be inferior. As a general rule of thumb, it's a little bit oversimplistic, but there is some evidence to suggest that this is the case. The more overweight you are and the more sedentary you are, the more you will tend to do better on lower carb or keto versus an opposite dietary pattern. And the leaner you are and the more physically active you are, the better you'll tend to do on a higher carb, lower fat diet.
And this just sounds rational. And I assure you that people are going to be just disagreeing. And but we need to come to a conclusion that not everyone is going to thrive on the same diet. And if anyone ever finds out the perfect diet for humanity, first of all, I don't think it's going to be possible, but then, kudos to them. But there is so much variability in our genomes that I don't think there is one perfect diet. Now, let me ask you, you have a consulting business. What type of patient is coming to our client is coming to you for advice?
Well, I was in the personal training. I was a personal trainer and nutritionist for a very long time. And so in those cases, the major people I was working with were people looking to get in shape and lose fat, or, sometimes build muscle, or some combination. Now I'm still in the fat loss realm to some extent, but I'm really focused on energy lately, and I have a program called the Energy Blueprint. And so the vast majority of my clients are middle-aged people who are fatigued, and either they might have chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, or they might have been diagnosed with adrenal fatigue, quote unquote, and or they might just be like have a chronic lack of energy and not really have been diagnosed with anything, and just not understand why they're dragging themselves through the day every day.
Let me ask you, what are some things that might seem normal to people but are not, and things that maybe they should perk their ears for to see if they need extra help with energy?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the biggest problems that we have in the world right now is that it's become normal to have low energy, and it's become normal and common to be sleepy and tired and exhausted, like chronically. And so you look around and you see other people who are also like you in that sense. And so you think, oh, everybody's like this. We're all like this. Well, we're not all like that. A lot of people have lots of energy and can function great, every day, and are awake and alert and don't need coffee every few hours to be awake and alert and functioning well. And so just kind of snapping out of that daze of realizing that you don't have to go through life that way. The problem is that everything is so subjective. So you don't necessarily know anymore what it's like to feel like a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10, because you've been functioning at a 5 or 6 out of 10 for the last 10 years.
Quick story, like before I started doing this evolutionary diet stuff, I used to have pain like on my ankles. And so, instead of being like, okay, let's try to fix this, I went to Walgreens and I bought a brace. I was 28 and I was like, oh, I'm just getting old. I didn't know what it felt to be healthy. Another thing that I didn't know was I didn't know what hunger was. I knew that at 2 o'clock when my sugar dipped, I needed to get something in my body fast, because if not, I was going to get hungry. But now when I do like a little fasting, or when I wait long enough and I can release that ghrelin, and my stomach starts growling, and I go, you know what, this feels good. It's my body's telling me it's time for food. I'm not freaking out, and now I enjoy my food way more, because probably my leptin is functioning properly, which is such a big difference. People don't know what it feels to be hungry.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up, because it blew my mind when I first realized that I would deal with people who literally haven't felt hunger in like 20 or 30 years. And it's just because people don't realize we eat for so many other reasons than that our body actually needs more fuel, that we're running low on fuel and the body's asking us to fill up. We eat out of boredom. We eat out of social convention. We eat because we're emotionally stressed. We eat, probably the biggest one is food reward, which Stephan Guyenet has talked about extensively, and which is basically just that food gives us pleasure. And so we want to give ourselves more pleasure. And so, oh, there's a cookie there. Oh, that looks good. I'm going to eat that. Are you eating it because you're hungry and in need of that, and you're just burned off a bunch of fuel that requires you to replenish your fuel stores? Or are you eating it because it looked good and it tastes good, you know? And so for a lot of people, the majority of people in the modern world today, I would venture a guess that 95% of the food we eat is mainly like out of those reasons rather than because we're hungry and we're in need of fuel to replenish what we've burned off.
And the biggest thing is that all of the things that you mentioned, you know, talking about depression or anxiety or stress, talking about, you know, having low sugars going up and down, all of those things, they do affect your energy, of course, but most importantly, they do stress your adrenals. They do stress all your hormones. And having a practitioner that is able to identify that, maybe you have a larger problem than just you need more calories or you need less calories. That there are so many working components by using different plants, by using different adaptogens, by using different minerals and vitamins in order to help you achieve that energy. And another problem that I see, I'm not sure with you, is how little we sleep.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a big part of why there's this chronic days of people kind of just not functioning very well, you know, physically or mentally, and being tired all the time. You know, I mentioned earlier that this has become the norm. Well, a big reason why it's the norm, and it's not just, you know, a handful of people, is because we live in a world that is built essentially perfectly to disrupt our circadian rhythm. You know, if you were going to go out of your way to design a place to live that is perfectly designed to disrupt human circadian rhythm, it would look not that different from the one that we live in.
I think the only step above to all the constraints on sleep that we've made so far is a casino.
Yeah.
You know, where they don't even have clocks, so you don't even know what time, you know, what time it is. But that's like
a good point.
That's about it, you know. But you have the blue lights, you have the constant stimulation, you have constant, you know, either food or drink, and this drive for, you know, doing things. And I read an article a couple of months ago talking about bragging about how little sleep you need to perform does not help anyone, because two reasons. It's a lie. Sleep, you know, affects us terribly when it comes to making decisions or tasks. And second, by you bragging about it, you're making everyone around you feel like they need to not sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that there's some maybe genetic aspect of why certain people can function on a very low amount of sleep. Personally, I never brag about how little sleep I get, and I think it's stupid. I make time to get at least 8 or 9 hours of sleep every night, and I need it. I do a lot of intense exercise. My body needs that recovery time. Guess what? If I try and function on 5 or 4 or 6 hours of sleep, my immune system is going to be run down in a few days. I'll get sick. Then I've lost all my progress. I got to not work out for a week or 2 weeks or whatever. And then I'm starting at a lower level of fitness, and then I got to build myself back up to where I was. It's just so counterproductive on so many levels to try to function on a lower level of sleep that it's just silly. And the people who do it, I do believe it's possible to do it. You're going to pay the price for it in the long run.
Eventually, you will. You know, you cannot burn the candle at both ends. It is a perfect segue for something else that I have been noticing more and more and more and more. It's all this biohacking stuff, and how we're trying to somehow circumvent hard work and take, you know, like you can go online and talk and type modafinil and biohack, and you will start, you know, you will have so many people talking about how they can circumvent sleep just by taking, you know, something. Or you can have people that are, you know, do these things and you won't have to put on the hard work and dedication. You know, but then when you really, really look at it, okay, the person who's telling you these biohacks have been doing an evolutionary diet for so long, or have been doing, or are genetically gifted, or whatever, that having that biohack might get them an extra 1% better. But then the people who are listening to this message probably have never done a squat, probably have never, eaten, cooked a meal in their lives. And now they're getting this message about biohacking, and they think that just by doing biohack after biohack after biohack, they're going to end up being healthier.
Oh no, you definitely don't need to do like any hard work, or you don't need to like eat well, or do exercise or do any of that lifestyle stuff. Yeah, but the thing is that it's sexy, and it's an appeal to the magic pill mentality, and people love that stuff. People love appeals to the magic pill mentality, and I think we're all prone to getting seduced by it. But because hard work isn't that sexy.
What are your biggest needle movers? I know we talked a lot about plants when we were out having our conversations, and I wanna segue into that, right? But we've talked about diet and having a clean diet. Whole foods. We talked about sleep. What other needle movers are you seeing with the population that you're working with, or have you seen over the years? What are the biggest things that a person can do today in order to change their health?
Well, one of them I'll mention is circadian rhythm, and we touched on it a little bit, but I want to make sure people don't just conflate sleep with circadian rhythm, because they're obviously related, but they're distinct things. And it's not just being in bed for 8 hours. And first of all, I'll make a distinction between sleep time and sleep period. So what you want to focus on is the time, the period from the moment you get into bed till the moment you wake up. And that is actually a different thing than how much you're actually sleeping. So for example, if I ask a person the question, how much do you sleep at night? What they will report to me is actually their sleep period, which is the time from the moment they get into bed, not the time from that their body is actually sleeping. And there's a gap there where we all sleep imperfectly. And so there's something called sleep efficiency, which is basically how much of that overall time is your body actually in sleep mode, and how deep and restful is your sleep? How much are you getting into those deep restorative phases of sleep, and how much time are you spending there? Someone who maybe thinks they sleep 8 hours, let's say, what they actually mean is they're in bed for that time. So they're actually sleeping more like 6 or 6.5.
And then you're checking your email at the end of the day, and then you're watching TV. One of the biggest changes I've made in my life was not having any lights in my bedroom.
Exactly. Yeah. So something like 95% of Americans use an electronic device within half an hour of going to bed. So they got a tablet or a cell phone in bed. They have a TV in their bedroom. They're working on their computer, whatever it is. But people are looking at devices emitting blue light right before bed. And guess what? That's another thing disturbing your sleep efficiency. So now you have less time in those deep restorative phases of sleep. So that's why it's important that we don't just look at, the number of hours that a person is sleeping. We have to first make that distinction between sleep time and sleep period. And most people need to lengthen their sleep period by an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours. And so focus on creating at least an 8-hour, if not more like a 9-hour sleep period, the time that you're actually in bed. So that's a good thing to focus on. Get rid of those electronic devices or use blue blockers for at least an hour before bed. And that's also going to enhance your sleep efficiency.
I'm gonna stop you with the blue blockers, okay? I'm gonna tell you one of my biggest pet peeves in this world. Is 9 o'clock in the morning when you should be getting all of the blue light in order to create some melatonin. People walking around with blue blockers. That is just the complete opposite.
Yes, yeah, people are afraid of blue light now.
And so when we went camping, the sun was setting at 5 p.m. because we were in the canyon. By 8 p.m., we were looking at our watches thinking it was 2 in the morning. And we were ready to go to bed like right there and then. And that was our body adjusting in less than 24 hours to the real circadian rhythm. Okay, so 100%. 1 hour before you go to bed, put on your blue lights, or change your whole house to have red lights, and block all the light, coming from the streets. The TV shouldn't be watched without the protection or whatever. But in the morning, first thing in the morning when you go walk your dog, make sure you're not wearing sunglasses.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's one of the other biggest aspects of circadian rhythm that I wanted to mention is one big problem that's a cause of fatigue and disrupts your metabolism, disrupts appetite regulation, mental performance, mood, so many different things, is we modern humans now live an almost entirely indoor existence. It is shocking to me how many people I deal with who, when I ask them how much sun exposure they get or how much time they spend outdoors, I literally have some people who say that they don't spend any time outdoors. And like they'll say to me, oh, maybe half an hour every few weeks. And so their entire life is now an indoor life separated from the sun and largely lived under the lighting from fluorescent lights or the light emitted from electronic devices. Now, there's research in animal experiments where they separate them from natural light. Like they put rats in cages under different lighting conditions. These ones go in, natural light. These ones go under this kind of light, incandescence. Let's say these go under fluorescent lights. These have partial access to, being near a window, something like that. There are profound differences in the lifespan, in the body composition, in the disease rates of these different mice in different lighting conditions. And this is a huge factor in health. And, we're kind of, everyone seems myopically fixated on, oh, is it carbs or fats? That's the bad thing. Like, sorry, but carbs and fats are just one aspect of things. And I would argue if you're eating whole foods, the ratio of carbs to fats probably doesn't even matter that much. So light is a big factor that's overlooked. And people living, if you're separate from the sun, if you're living your life disconnected from being outdoors and being in sunlight, you're going to have a really hard time being healthy, no matter how many thousands of dollars you spend on doctor visits and supplements.
Or supplements, yeah. And so now let's go to that next topic, okay? Supplementation. So one of the things that I do and that helps me with my sleep and sort of like habits are very important to me, because it triggers a response that, oh, it's time to go to bed. And I use a product called Natural Calm. They're not my sponsor or anything. I just like their product. It's magnesium citrate, which is not even the most absorbable type of magnesium. A chelated form of magnesium would be better, but I like the product. And you mix it with a little bit of hot water, and then you sip it. And then by the time I'm sipping it, I'm like, my brain is like, oh, it's time to unwind. Okay. And that, sets the stage for, my ritual to going to bed. What are your top 3 supplements that you are taking right now?
That I'm taking right now. Right now, I'm taking rhodiola. So rhodiola is an adaptogen, and there's certain other adaptogenic herbs. So, for example, ashwagandha or ginseng or gotu kola. Some certain mushrooms like reishi and cordyceps can also be adaptogenic herbs, and I'm a huge fan of them. I think that they're great substances that enhance our resilience in the face of stress. And they worked as anti-inflammatories. They're not antioxidants, even though many people refer to them as antioxidants, and that's a whole thing unto itself. But they have multiple mechanisms of action that essentially enhance our cellular health and our mitochondrial health and the ability of our mitochondria to produce energy efficiently. And I think in the modern world that we live in, it's extremely important that we have agents in our life, whether in the form of phytonutrients or other kinds of what are called hormetic stressors, which are basically beneficial stressors. They're stressors which stimulate our body and especially our mitochondria to make adaptations that make us more resilient in the face of stress and make us stronger and more robust and more energetic, I should also add. And in the modern world, we are severely deficient in these various forms of hormetic stressors. So one simple way of giving yourself a boost in that way um, is phytonutrients and especially adaptogenic herbs.
Yeah, and adaptogenic herbs by definition, they are supposed to modulate. So, like if you are low in cortisol, they're supposed to raise your cortisol to levels that are physiologically normal. If you're high, they're supposed to bring them down. They are non-toxic and non-habit forming, and that's the Russian definition for an adaptogen. Yeah, so they're this very complicated plants, and going through a naturopathic medicine program, we have to learn these plants, and sometimes the scientific community just rolls their eyes and say, how can a plant, do modulate up or down? How does it know? Well, so I'm actually doing some research right now into the how do these plants do this. And one of the coolest things that we found is that if you take the one of these adaptogens and you test just the leaves, okay, the aerial parts, they have a very specific effect on your immune system. And if you take just the root, it has a completely paradoxical, effect on your immune system. When we're making this tinctures or this adaptogen supplements, we're not just taking the leaves, we're not just taking the root, we're mixing them together. So now you can see how your body just takes advantage of, just by having the cofactors put in there, and it's going to upregulate or downregulate because you're already on one side of the spectrum.
Interesting.
Yeah,
That's fascinating.
And it's fascinating that we have been using adaptogens for so long, and not just adaptogens, all of these different plant materials. And the way that we discovered these effects was not with microscopes. It was not with ELISAs and PCRs. It was by trial and error. And we had thousands of years using these materials. And we basically weeded out what worked and what didn't, no pun intended. But now, in the modern world that we live in, we have to have evidence. So now we're going back and testing these traditional plants just to put evidence to make sure that these plants that are so important, could be such useful tools for health, are taken seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I had said something when we were camping that I was actually surprised that you disagreed with, but I still very strongly believe that lack of phytonutrients in the diet is a huge aspect of why we're in such poor health. I think it's a massive contributor to all sorts of different diseases, and as well as fatigue in general.
So let 2 minutes on this topic of the antioxidant effect of things. Okay, so you clearly said they are not antioxidant; they're actually pro-oxidant. Can you just 2 minutes on that?
Yeah. So in popular lingo and what you'll find in articles and videos all over the internet, you'll see people referring to phytonutrients as antioxidants. So, we use this term antioxidants, and we say that about vitamin C and vitamin A and vitamin E. And we also say it about blueberries and pomegranates, and, the phytonutrients in basically all fruits and vegetables, and herbs. And they're not the same thing. So if basically the whole central crux of this concept comes out of something called the free radical theory of aging. And this has been a major theory of aging for, I think, about since the 1950s. And basically, the central idea is we have these things called oxidants or free radicals, and that when we have too much of them, they cause damage to our cells and to our mitochondria. And that's essentially the cause of aging. If we get enough damage, then we age and we get disease. And out of that logic, that simple premise, comes the idea of antioxidants. And so, oh, if that's what causes aging is these free radicals, then let's take antioxidants, and antioxidants
Well,
quell
neutralize.
or yeah, they neutralize free radicals. And so that's going to prevent aging and disease. And, it makes sense. It's super logical, right? And that's why, because it's so logical and it makes so much sense, it fits well with the understanding of things. That's why this idea is so insanely popular, where almost the whole world believes in this concept. And yet, if you actually look at the evidence, there's a mountain of evidence that refutes this whole theory, to the point where almost every aging researcher on the planet has now discarded the free radical theory of aging and the idea that antioxidants can prevent aging and prevent disease. If you look at the latest evidence, and feel free to, if anybody questions me, feel free to do your own research on this and look up the big trials and meta-analyses where they've looked at vitamin C or vitamin E supplementation for prevention of heart disease or for prolonging life or prevention of cancer. If you look deeply into this, you will find a mountain of evidence that not only shows no benefit to supplementing with these things, but in many cases actually shows harm and shows that more people are dying and more people are dying faster. So people who are naturalistic minded have a hard time wrapping their head around that. And I certainly did for many years, and I couldn't make sense of this until I realized that phytonutrients are not antioxidants, and their primary mechanism of action is not through antioxidation. There are some chemicals, certain chemicals within the overall constellation of chemicals in a given food that might have antioxidant properties. So as an example, an orange or a lemon has vitamin C in it, which has antioxidant effects, but it also has lots of other phytonutrients in it that have pro-oxidant effects. So the overall effect of that food is not necessarily an antioxidant effect in our body. So what phytonutrients actually do is, they essentially activate phase 2 detoxification enzymes, and they stimulate a system in our cells and in our mitochondria called the ARE, which is antioxidant response element. And essentially, they activate that system much the same way that, for example, exercise does. Exercise is something that generates free radicals. And so it triggers that system to activate and builds it, makes it more robust, in much the same way that if you lift a weight every day, your muscle grows. It grows stronger, it grows bigger. So when we challenge this system through toxins like phytonutrients, and certain specific toxins that our body seems to have co-evolved with and responds very well to, now that system is built up. And so that actually builds up our internal antioxidant defense system. So there's a difference between doing something which builds up your internal strength and internal defense system versus just providing an exogenous source of something. So for example, let's say that you yourself are powering a bike and you're pedaling and using your muscles to power a bike. Okay. And you actively have to do that work using your muscles. On the other hand, I can make your body do the exact same thing I can just have you lay on your back and I'll take your legs and move them in a bike, fashion, in the same motion. But now you're not doing any work. You don't have to use your muscles to accomplish anything. You're not being challenged in any way. Well, look at what will happen. What are the destinies of those two things? In the person who's exercising, in the situation where you're exercising, your muscles are going to be stronger, your mitochondria are going to be stimulated, you're going to get all of the benefits that are associated with exercise. which are vast: prevention of numerous diseases, extension of lifespan, enhanced energy, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, if you just lay on your back and I exogenously provide that same motion to you, your muscles are going to atrophy, you're going to get weaker, you're going to get more fatigued, you're going to get more prone to disease. And so there's a big difference between providing exogenous antioxidants to the system versus doing stuff which stimulates your internal antioxidant defense system. And phytonutrients do that.
And this is going to be a, the big difference between, not getting rid of all the load of oxidants that we consume with like rancid oils or processed food, living in a city, and then trying to detoxify or try by adding more antioxidant or oxidants. You're just going to break the camel's back.
Yep. Yeah, it's fragilizing to the system. Instead of you making you more resilient and more robust, it's making you more fragile.
On the other hand, if you eliminate all of this reactive oxygen species, and then you exercise your immune system, you exercise your mitochondria, with adaptogens or any other phytochemical that is going to be hormetic, now you're going to be more robust. But you cannot have a toxic person look at a healthy person doing this protocol and expect the same results.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, man, fascinating conversation. Maybe in like 6 months we can, loop around and see what you're up to. But where can people find your work? Where can people contact you, ask you questions, or yell at you for not being keto, bro?
The best place would be theenergyblueprint.com.
And what are your books?
I have one called Forever Fat Loss. That's my biggest seller. And then the other one's The Low Carb Myth. Forever Fat Loss is really a practical how-to book of fat loss for the person who actually wants to lose fat. The Low Carb Myth is written more with like practitioners and high-level people in mind, people who are nutrition geeks and have a deep understanding of the science already. And so it's not necessarily the most accessible book for the average person, but it's a great book for doctors, for trainers, for nutritionists, dietitians, and things of that nature.
And and it's so important because even if you are in the low carb camp, reading things that challenge you are just going to make you stronger, because this is, we should look at ketogenic diets as a tool, not as the end all be all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm on board with that. Just so people know, I'm not preaching that everybody should go eat a high carb, low fat diet or something like that. There's absolutely a place for a range of different diets, including keto, including low carb. And, this book is just about understanding the science a little deeper and maybe not viewing low carb or low fat as the panacea, or carbs or fats as the one, nutrient devil, and kind of just coming more to our senses as to what's important nutritionally.
Awesome. I'm going to try to gather all these things that we talked about. I'm going to put in the show notes so people can see. And I'll have links to your social media and your website. Dude, it's been awesome. Thanks for giving me this interview. And hopefully we can help more people that maybe are not going to benefit that much with ketogenic diets, and show them that it's not them. It's actually, there's different diets for individuals.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you so much, man.